My earliest memories are of my dad's warm smile and the cozy feeling of our small rented apartment. My name is Haley, and until I turned 14, my life was simple in the best way possible. My dad, Mark, had a way of turning ordinary moments into adventures. Even though we lived in a modest apartment, he transformed our tiny balcony into a magical garden and made rainy weekends exciting by building forts in the living room. My mom, Grace, was different. She was quieter and often dreamed of having a bigger house and a more glamorous life. But back then, their differences seemed to balance out perfectly. Mom would often ask me, "Haley, sweetie, do you want to spend the weekend at Grandpa's?" I'd always jump at the chance. Not because I didn't want to be at home, but because Grandpa Jack's house felt like a second home to me. Grandpa's place was an old two-story Victorian house with creaky wooden floors and endless corners to explore. When I'd arrive, he'd greet me with a warm smile and say, "Your mother needs some alone time with your father, and I need my time with my favorite granddaughter." I was more observant than most adults realized. I understood that Mom needed her space and that she and Dad had their own bond to maintain. It didn't bother me. If anything, it made me feel grown up. Besides, my weekends with Grandpa were special. He'd tell me stories about Dad's childhood, teach me about saving money — he was a retired bank manager — and make the most delicious pancakes. One morning, while we were having breakfast on his porch, Grandpa said, "Your mom dreams of having a house like this one. But do you know what's more important than a big house? A home filled with love." I nodded, even though I was young, because I understood what he meant. Our apartment might have been small, but it was full of love. Dad worked at an insurance company and would come home each evening with so much energy. He'd swing me around in his arms and smother Mom with kisses until she couldn't help but laugh. Moments like those made our little apartment feel huge, like nothing else mattered. But life has a way of surprising you, changing everything when you least expect it. I was 14 when Dad started losing weight fast. At first, he joked about it, saying he was finally getting fit, but his eyes told a different story. He started going to the doctor more often, and Mom looked more worried every day. "It's just a phase," Dad would say, ruffling my hair with a weak smile. "I'll be back to my old self soon." But he wasn't. The truth hit us hard. He had aggressive pancreatic cancer. It spread through him like wildfire, and in just a few months, my strong, lively dad became a shadow of who he used to be. I watched helplessly as Mom tried to keep everything together, but I could see she was breaking inside. I'll never forget the last conversation I had with Dad. He was lying in his hospital bed, barely strong enough to hold my hand. "Take care of your mom for me, princess," he whispered. "And let Grandpa guide you. He's wiser than all of us put together." The year after Dad passed felt like living in a fog. Mom fell into a deep depression and could hardly look at me. I guess I reminded her too much of him. Thankfully, Grandpa Jack became my safe place. He was my rock during the storm our lives had become. Living with Grandpa wasn't just temporary anymore. It became my new normal. Every morning, I woke up in Dad's old room, surrounded by his childhood photos and trophies. Grandpa made sure I stayed on top of school, helped me with homework, and tried his best to fill the gap left by both my parents, one who was gone and the other lost in grief. Mom would call sometimes, but her voice always sounded far away, like she wasn't really there. Her visits were even rarer, just quick stops where she'd barely look at me before leaving again. I eventually stopped hoping for more. Then, exactly 1 year and 3 months after Dad passed, everything changed. Mom showed up at Grandpa's door one sunny Saturday morning, and I almost didn't recognize her. She wasn't the sad, grieving widow anymore. She was wearing a bright yellow dress, had a new haircut, and her face was glowing with excitement. "Haley, sweetie, pack your things, you're coming home," she announced, practically bouncing on her heels like a teenager. I looked at Grandpa, confused, and he seemed just as surprised as I was. The drive back to our apartment was filled with Mom's cheerful talk about random things. It felt like I was sitting next to a stranger who only looked like my mom. But the real shock hit me when we stepped into the apartment. In our small living room stood a tall man and a girl who looked about 4 years younger than me. They both smiled nervously as Mom practically skipped over to them. Haley, meet Tyler and his daughter Alyssa, Mom said, beaming as she grabbed Tyler's arm. Tyler is my fiancé, and Alyssa will be your new sister. We're getting married soon. The room started spinning. What? When did this happen? Oh, we've been dating for a while now, Mom said, waving her hand like it was no big deal. I didn't tell anyone because, people can get jealous and judgmental. It was better to keep it private. I stumbled to my old room, barely noticing that it had been completely redecorated. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and called Grandpa. He picked up right away. Mom has a fiancé, I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. She's getting married and she didn't tell anyone. There's a man here and his daughter. Grandpa arrived within 30 minutes. From my room, I could hear him confronting Mom. Grace, how could you do this without telling anyone? Without telling your own daughters? Dad, I'm happy for the first time in forever, Mom said defensively. I've decided to move on, to live again. Mark wouldn't want me to stay stuck in sadness forever. There was a long silence before Grandpa finally replied, his voice heavy. I hope you'll be happy, Grace. Just don't forget you have a daughter who needs you too. The 4 months leading up to the wedding felt like living in a strange, twisted world. Our small apartment, which already felt tight with just the two of us, now felt even more crowded with 5 people. But the worst part wasn't the lack of space. It was watching Alyssa, my soon-to-be stepsister, take over my mom's attention. Mom, can you help me with my hair? Alyssa would ask sweetly, and Mom would drop whatever she was doing, even if she was in the middle of talking to me. The way Alyssa said Mom made my skin crawl, especially since she had only known her for a few months. But Mom didn't seem to notice. She was completely focused on Alyssa. When Alyssa mentioned she liked ballet, Mom signed her up for private lessons right away, something she had never done for me. For years, I had begged for things like a new phone or redecorating my room, but Mom always said we couldn't afford it. Yet when Alyssa complained about her old phone being slow, Mom bought her the latest iPhone. When Alyssa decided she didn't like how our shared bedroom looked, Mom took her shopping and spent hundreds on new bedding, curtains, and decorations. Your sister needs to feel welcome here, Mom would say whenever I brought up how unfair it felt. Stepsister, I'd correct her. And I need to feel welcome too. She would just shake her head and walk away. The wedding was a small event at a local venue, but Mom looked radiant and happy. I stood there in my bridesmaid dress, watching as she fussed over Alyssa's hair and makeup. She barely glanced my way. During the ceremony and reception, Mom held Alyssa's hand and introduced her to everyone as my beautiful daughter. It felt like I was invisible, more like a server than part of the family. Grandpa gave Mom and Tyler a $10,000 check as a wedding gift, which was generous by any measure. But I overheard Mom cornering him near the restrooms, clearly unhappy. Really, Dad? A check, she hissed, her face red from champagne and anger. I was counting on you giving us your house. We're a proper family now, and we need the space. That apartment is too small for 5 people. Grandpa stayed calm, though I could see the disappointment in his eyes. Grace, you're rushing into everything, first this quick engagement, now this. That house isn't just property to hand over on a whim. Besides, it's where Haley spends half her time. Oh, so now you're playing favorites? Mom snapped. No, Grandpa said firmly. I'm being practical. And maybe you should be too. I slipped away before they could notice me, but their words stuck with me. Mom had changed so much that I barely recognized her anymore. She had created this picture-perfect family in her mind, with Alyssa as the golden child and Tyler as the perfect husband. It felt like there wasn't any room left for me. So, I started spending more time at Grandpa's house. At least there, I didn't have to pretend to be happy about being pushed aside. 5 years have passed since then, and I'm about to graduate high school. Living in that apartment has been like a lesson in avoiding conflict. I've learned to stay quiet, take up as little space as possible, and spend most of my time either in my room or at Grandpa's. One evening, during one of our weekly family dinners, a ritual that felt more like pretending we were a happy family, I realized just how far things had changed. I decided it was time to share my plans for the future. I've been accepted to State University, I announced, trying to keep my voice steady. I want to study finance and business management. The room went completely silent. Mom put down her fork, exchanged a look with Tyler, and cleared her throat. Actually, Haley, she said, I think it might be better if you started working after graduation. College isn't necessary for everyone. I stared at her, confused. What are you talking about? Dad set up a college fund for me before he died. He always wanted me to go to college. Mom shifted uncomfortably in her chair. About that fund, Tyler and I have been talking, and we think it would be better to save that money for Alyssa's education. She's so talented, top of her class and everything. She'll need a good university education to reach her full potential. Tyler nodded in agreement. Alyssa has shown remarkable promise in her studies. It would be the right thing to do, Haley. You could work for a few years, save up, and then go to college if you still wanna. It felt like the air had been knocked out of me. The college fund, the last gift my father had arranged for me, they wanted to take that too. That money is mine, I said, my voice trembling with anger. Dad left it specifically for my education. You can't just give it to Alyssa. Don't be selfish, Haley, Mom said, her eyes filling with tears. Alyssa is your sister's stepsister, I interrupted, standing up so fast my chair tipped over. And that money is the last thing I have from Dad. You've given her everything else, my room, your attention, your love, but you can't have this. I won't let you take it. How dare you? Mom said, now crying openly, but I could see through her tears. After everything we've done for you? Alyssa needs this. Alyssa needs? I shouted. What about what I need? What about what Dad wanted for me? The argument ended with slamming doors and tears, mostly Mom's, as she wailed about how selfish I was. After that night, the apartment became even more unbearable. No one spoke to me unless they had to. Alyssa smirked whenever she walked past me, and Tyler wouldn't even look in my direction. On graduation day, I wasn't surprised to see only Grandpa in the audience. He cheered so loudly when they called my name that it almost made up for the absence of anyone else. His proud smile meant more to me than anything my so-called new family could have offered. That evening, I packed up everything I owned. I packed everything I owned into 3 cardboard boxes and an old suitcase. Grandpa helped me load them into his car. Your room is always ready for you, sweetheart, he said as we drove away. Always has been, always will be. I didn't look back. There was nothing left for me there. College became my escape. I threw myself into my studies, determined to make Dad and Grandpa proud. I loved my business and finance classes and worked harder than I ever had before. I started excelling in ways I knew would have made Dad smile. Every evening, I'd call Grandpa to share what I was learning. Tell me about derivatives again, he'd say, even though he probably knew more about finance than my professors. I love hearing you explain it. But as the years went on, I noticed small changes in Grandpa's voice during our calls. He got tired more easily, and his usual sharp wit sometimes seemed dulled. During my visits home, I'd see him wince when he stood up or rub his chest when he thought I wasn't watching. It's just age catching up with me, he'd say when I asked. Nothing to worry about, sweetheart. But I did worry. I started calling him twice a day instead of once, and I drove home every weekend I could, not just during holidays. We'd sit in his kitchen, drinking tea and talking about anything and everything, just like we always had. Sometimes, I'd catch him looking at me with so much love that it made my throat tighten. Then, in the middle of my final semester, Mom called. It was the first time she'd reached out in 5 years. At first, I thought about ignoring it, but something made me pick up. Grandpa died last night, she said, her voice flat and emotionless. The funeral is on Saturday at 3 p.m. at New York Funeral Home. The phone slipped from my hand. I don't remember much of what happened after that, except my roommate finding me curled up on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Saturday came too quickly, and not quickly enough. The funeral home was exactly the kind of place Grandpa would have liked, simple but elegant, with big windows letting in lots of natural light. I arrived early, wearing a black dress that felt too tight and uncomfortable. Everything felt wrong because Grandpa wasn't there to make it right. I expected to see Mom and her family, but they weren't there. Instead, I found Mr. Christian, Grandpa's friend from his banking days, organizing the service. "They're running a bit late," he said when I asked. "Your mother called to let me know." The service was beautiful, filled with people who had known and loved Grandpa. They shared stories about his kindness, his honesty, and his humor. I sat alone in the front row, overwhelmed by grief. Halfway through the service, I heard the back door creak open. Mom walked in with Tyler and Alyssa, all dressed in perfectly coordinated black outfits. They sat in the far back, and Mom didn't even look my way. Her face held an expression of polite sadness, but her eyes were scanning the room, assessing and calculating. I turned back to face the front, my tears now burning with not just grief but anger. Even here, even now, she couldn't acknowledge me. She couldn't put aside her spite, not even for one day, to properly mourn her own father. After the service, I drove to Grandpa's house, my home for the past 5 years. But when I arrived, I froze at the sight in front of me. Scattered across the lawn were garbage bags filled with my belongings, my clothes, books, photo albums, everything from my room, thrown out like trash. Some bags had split open, and my things were spilling onto the grass. With trembling hands, I tried my key in the front door, but it wouldn't turn. The lock had been changed. I was still standing there, stunned and helpless, when the door opened. Mom stood in the doorway, still wearing her black funeral dress. But her face was no longer sad. It was triumphant. "Oh, good. You're here to collect your things," she said, as if she were doing me a favor. "This is my house now. Dad's gone, and as his only child, I'm the rightful heir. I've already changed the locks. We're moving in tonight." I stared at her, unable to believe the cruelty of her words. "You couldn't even wait until after the funeral?" I said, my voice shaking. "These are my things. This was my home." "No," she said sharply, cutting me off. "This is my home now. Take your stuff quickly, or it's going in the dumpster." "I need to clear the space for Alyssa's things," Mom said with a cold smile. "She's getting your old room, by the way. She's always wanted a bigger bedroom." I felt numb as I gathered my belongings, shoving them back into the torn bags and trying to pick up the scattered photos of Dad and Grandpa from the grass. Mom stood in the doorway the whole time, watching me like a security guard, as if I might steal something. The drive back to my college dorm was a blur of tears and disbelief. My roommate didn't ask any questions when she saw me. She just helped me carry everything inside. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a law firm. "Miss Johnson, this is Mr. Matthew from Matthew and Partners Law Firm. I'm your grandfather's notary. We need you to come in for the reading of his will. Would Saturday at 11 a.m. work for you?" I agreed, even though I didn't see the point. Mom had made it very clear she was inheriting everything. When I arrived at the notary's office on Saturday, Mom, Tyler, and Alyssa were already there. They sat in leather chairs like they owned the place. Alyssa was examining her nails, while Tyler scrolled through his phone. Mom's eyes narrowed when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she said loudly, making sure everyone in the room could hear. "You're not needed for this. We're handling family business." Mr. Matthew adjusted his glasses and started reading the will. Jack Mark Mitchell, being of sound mind and body, declare this to be my last will and testament. He began with the usual formalities, and I saw Mom smiling, confident. But that smile froze when he continued. "To my beloved granddaughter, Haley Johnson, I leave my house at 143 Collier Street, along with all its contents, and my entire savings account containing $550,000. The room went completely silent. Then Mom's voice cut through like a knife. "What? This can't be right," she shouted, grabbing the document from Mr. Matthew. Her eyes scanned it frantically. "Where's my part? I'm his daughter." Mr. Matthew calmly took the will back. "Mrs. Waters, your father's wishes are very clear. He leaves everything to Miss Haley Johnson. There is no provision for you in the will. This is impossible." Mom's face turned red with rage. She manipulated him. She turned him against me. "I'll sue. I'll contest this will," Mom shouted. "The will is ironclad," Mr. Matthew replied calmly. Your father had it properly witnessed and notarized 7 months ago. He was of completely sound mind, as confirmed by his doctor. Any attempt to contest it would be futile and very expensive. Mom's strategy shifted instantly. The anger in her eyes turned into tears, and her tone became sweet as honey. Haley, sweetie, please, she said, her voice trembling. We've already given up our apartment. We moved everything out yesterday. We have nowhere to go. You can't just throw us out on the street. We're family. I stood up, holding the folder Mr. Matthew had just handed me. Inside were the deed to the house, the ownership transfer documents, and all the legal paperwork proving I now own the property. Family? I asked quietly, meeting her tearful gaze. Like how you threw all my things onto the lawn before Grandpa was even in his grave. Like how you tried to steal my college fund. Like how you've treated me for the past 5 years. That was different. She started, but I cut her off. This is your problem, not mine. I suggest you start looking for a new apartment, I said firmly, turning to leave. I drove straight to Grandpa's house, my house now, but when I tried the key, it didn't work. Taking out my phone, I called a locksmith and explained the situation. When he arrived, I showed him the notarized documents. I'm the legal owner of this house, I told him, holding up the paperwork. I need you to open these locks and then change them. I want to be the only one with the keys. As the locksmith worked, I went through the house, gathering everything that belonged to Mom, Tyler, and Alyssa. I packed up their clothes, toiletries, and even the posters Alyssa had already stuck on my old bedroom walls. I loaded it all into garbage bags, just like they had done with my belongings days ago. When the locksmith handed me the new keys, I dragged all their bags onto the front porch and arranged them neatly. The irony wasn't lost on me. Their things now sat where mine had been, scattered on the lawn just days before. As the sun began to set, I heard the familiar sound of Mom's car pulling into the driveway. Standing by the living room window, Grandpa's favorite spot for reading the morning paper, I watched as their reactions unfolded exactly as I expected. What is this? Mom's voice shrieked loud enough to be heard through the closed windows. Our things. All our things are outside. I opened the door, but stood firmly in the doorway as they approached. Mom's face was bright red with anger. Tyler looked like he had swallowed something bitter, and Alyssa was already crying her dramatic tears. How dare you? Mom shouted as she stormed up the porch steps. We live here now. You can't do this to us. Actually, I can, I said calmly. This is my house now, legally and rightfully. You need to take your things and leave. We have nowhere to go. Alyssa cried. You should have thought about that before giving up your apartment, I replied coolly. Not my problem. Mom tried to push past me into the house, but I didn't move. Move, Haley. This is ridiculous. This is my father's house. No, I said firmly. It's my house now. If you don't leave with your belongings immediately, I'll call the police and report you for trespassing. And if you don't take your bags, they'll go straight to the dumpster. I pulled out my phone. Your choice, Mom, just like you gave me a choice when you threw my things on the lawn. The next few minutes were filled with yelling and threats as they gathered their bags. Mom switched between crying and shouting about how unfair it all was, while Alyssa kept muttering that I'd regret this. Tyler grumbled under his breath about contesting the will. When they finally loaded the last bag into their car, Mom turned to me one last time. You're no daughter of mine. Your father would be ashamed of you. I gave her a sad smile.
No, Mom.
Dad would be proud that I finally stood up for myself.
Goodbye.
I watched them drive away, their car disappearing around the corner. That was 7 months ago. I'm in my final semester now, about to graduate with honors. The house is being rented to a lovely young family, and their monthly rent is helping me build my savings, just as Grandpa would have wanted. On the first night after they left, I found a letter in Grandpa's study safe. My dearest Haley, it began. If you're reading this, it means you've already dealt with your mother's reaction to my will. I'm sorry you had to go through that, but I knew Grace too well. I knew what she would try to do. You have your father's integrity and my business sense, Grandpa had written. Use them both wisely. The house is yours to do with as you wish, but promise me you'll keep the family photos in the attic. Some memories are worth keeping, even the painful ones. I kept that promise, along with the others I made to both Grandpa and Dad. Now I'm focusing on my future, letting go of the past, but holding on to the lessons it taught me. Sometimes, family isn't the people you're born to, it's the ones who believe in you, protect you, and help you grow. Mom, Tyler, and Alyssa still live somewhere in the city. I've heard they found a new apartment eventually. They've tried to reach out a few times, usually when they need something, but I don't respond. Some chapters of our lives are better left closed.